Hello, this is Kevin Lausch with the Unitarian Universalists of Transylvania County, and we're here again with the Chalice Children's book reading. And this week we're reading the book The Curious Garden by Peter Brown. And it's a book about commitment. And commitment is the theme that we are following for this month. And in this book, a little boy commits to something and helps something wonderful happen in his city. So let's get into the book and see what happens. The Curious Garden by Peter Brown. There once was a city without gardens or trees or greenery of any kind. Most people spent their time indoors. As you can imagine, it was a very dreary place. However, there was one boy who loved being outside. Even on drizzly days, while everyone else stayed inside, you could always find Liam happily splashing through his neighborhood. In one such morning, that Liam made several surprising discoveries. He was wandering around the old railway, as he did from time to time, when he stumbled upon a dark stairwell leading up to the tracks. The railway had stopped working years ago. Since Liam had always wanted to explore the tracks, there was only one thing for the curious boy to do. Liam ran up the stairs, pushed open the door, and stepped out onto the railway. The first thing he saw was a lonely patch of color. Wildflowers and plants were the last thing he had expected to find up there. But when he took a closer look, it became clear that the plants were dying. They needed a gardener. Liam may not have been a gardener, but he knew that he could help. So he returned to the railway the very next day and got to work. The flowers nearly drowned, and he had a few pruning problems, but the plants patiently waited while Liam found better ways of gardening. As the weeks rolled by, Liam began to feel like a real gardener, and the plants began to feel like a real garden. Most gardens stay in one place, but this was no ordinary garden. With miles of open railway ahead of it, the garden was growing restless. It wanted to explore. The tough little weeds and mosses were the first to move. They popped up further and further down the tracks and were closely followed by the more delicate plants. Over the course of a few months, Liam and the curious garden explored every corner of the railway. After spending his spring and summer and autumn with the garden, Liam's time on the railway was finally interrupted by winter. Heavy blankets of snow fell on the city that season, and for the first time since he'd become a gardener, Liam could not visit the plants. Rather than waste his winter worrying about the garden, Liam spent it preparing for spring. After 3 cold months, the snow finally began to melt, and Liam rolled his new gardening gear over to the railway. Winter had taken a toll on the garden, but thanks to Liam's planning, his handy new tools, and a little help from the sun, the plants soon awoke from their winter sleep. The garden had always wanted to explore the rest of the city, and that spring it was finally ready to make its move. Once again, the tough little weeds and mosses set out first. They popped up further and further from the railway and were closely followed by the more delicate plants. The garden was especially curious about old, forgotten things. A few plants popped up where they didn't belong. Others mysteriously popped up all at once. But the most surprising thing that popped up were the new gardeners. Many years later, the entire city had blossomed. But of all the new gardens, Liam's favorite was where it all began. The end. So that was our book, The Curious Garden. And what's interesting is in the back of the book, there's an author's note about something in New York City. And it's about an old rail line called the High Line that rumbled above the cities and between the buildings. How the author visited it after the railway was shut down and saw nature slowly beginning to creep in and weeds and grasses and things starting to grow on the old railway track. And so he wondered what would happen if somebody committed, if a whole city decided to sort of take part in helping something grow. So I thought that was a neat book about commitment, The Curious Garden. My question for you is, what will you commit to? Meaning, what will you work hard to make happen? Let's think about that this month as we start our pledge drive for the church and help make wonderful things happen for the year to come. Have a great day.